It is difficult to make an argument for glass blowing as a sustainable craft practice. Hand making a drinking glass takes 3 kilns heated between 500 and 1200 degrees Celsius. It is an energy guzzling making method. Recognizing this problem, however, allows artisanal glass to become a space to explore key problems in the relationship between the ethical and the aesthetic dimensions of neo-artisanal practice. I should have been here in my studio the last few months, frantically making items to show you and preparing to demonstrate different glass making techniques that I've been including with digital design the last few years. But instead I'm here working from home, mostly in the garage and the shed, so I'm pretty lucky to have the space to expand. And now has actually been a really good time to dig deep and explore what my glass practice means to me and how it can be communicated on a digital platform.
Hi, my name is Laura Quinn. I'd like to thank the Glass Art Society for giving me this opportunity to share with you my presentation online. Enjoy, and if you have any questions or feedback for me, please feel free to email me or reach out to me through my social media channels. You can find the information for this at the end of the video.
So here we have it. I will be presenting today on a topic that I've researched throughout my master's studies. I will be exploring the crossover between glass and 3D printing and digital design in order to make a sustainable craft practice. I think it's really important for me to explain my background so that you know why I make what I make. I've been making glass since 2011. I completed my BA in glass design in the National College of Art and Design in Dublin. I then went on to work in the Corning Museum of Glass in New York, in Estonia, and then finally in the UK. I completed my Masters in 2019 in 3D Design Crafts from Plymouth College of Art here in the UK. And surprisingly enough, I managed to gain a position during lockdown as the new glass technical tutor here at the University for the Creative Arts in Farnham in the UK. So let me take you back to where it all began for me. For my bachelor's degree, I produced a body of work that looked at combining glass with other materials such as rubber and metal to make larger, more durable, wearable sculptures. This was the very start of my research and that questioning into the interface between glass and other materials. It was definitely not fully resolved, but it was a good start. So the first piece I'll show you here is Bells of Digitalis. This piece is based on the foxglove and its use in traditional Irish medicine. The piece itself is made up of nearly 30 individually lampworked blown glass bells, and they fit onto a main frame of rubber and copper. The way that they fit on is that there's little feet on the end of the glass bells, and I've used rubber strips to wrap them into place. This was definitely the start of my thinking of interchangeable design, knowing that these bells could very well get broken over time being shipped to galleries and coming back, and that I'd be able to just simply unwrap the rubber and replace them. However, I wasn't fully happy with that outcome. It did indeed look visually very dramatic, but as time went on and having to repair the glass pieces, I found that it was actually quite difficult to take them all apart. So I thought, is there a better way to do this? And eventually, when I ended up here in the UK, working as a glassblowing assistant in a studio, we often had people coming in asking us to repair broken writing flasks. We'd have to smash the glass out of this really precious, fine silver parts and often end up damaging the silver in the process. So, I thought to myself, is there a better way of combining the silver in the glass that doesn't use glue or cement, that uses more of a mechanical fixing so that each material and each part can maintain its integrity and come apart from each other in order for repair or, who knows, even redesign. After about 2 years working in the field, I decided it was time to go back and explore this thought further in my master's studies. That's when I put together my master's research question. Can we improve the interface between handmade glass and other materials with the assistance of digital design technologies to create a viable handmade object in the production setting? Exploring this interface between glass and other materials was a research that really peppered its way throughout my glass history. It didn't take me long to come across David Pye's work. For those of you who don't know who David Pye is, he worked as a lecturer in the Royal College of Art in London, but he himself had quite a profound practice in furniture design and making, so his works are backed up hugely by that intrinsic knowledge that he has with the material and with that relationship between the maker and the material. In his book, The Nature and Art of Workmanship, Pye talks about two types of workmanship: the workmanship of risk and the workmanship of certainty. The workmanship of risk is workmanship using any kind of technique or apparatus in which the quality of the result is not predetermined, but depends on the judgment, dexterity and care which the maker exercises as he works. And the workmanship of certainty is workmanship where this sort of quality of the result is exactly predetermined before a single saleable thing is made. Pye goes on to explain that handicraft would come under the workmanship of risk and mass automated production would come under the workmanship of certainty. But he also goes on to explain that any singular manufacturing process can fall under both risk and certainty. If you look at a ceramicist, as soon as he introduces jigs or even moulds into his practice, it's introducing certainty. And when you start off with a mass automated production line, at the beginning there's a lot of risk during the prototyping stage, not knowing what the end result will be. I believe as neo-artisans, we have the tools to adapt to create more sustainable work now. That area that we like to exist in and that we can thrive in is a sweet spot. It's an advantageous spot. It's a crossover in the Venn diagram between the work of risk and the work of certainty. If we can produce work in there, we really have a good shot of tackling consumerism, materiality and materialism that has led to the current environmental crisis. For me, I suppose I started to think about the blowing process and how I could make it more sustainable. And one of those ways was perhaps by trying to predetermine the result and make sure that what I was making was not only saleable, but was an object that was fit for purpose. That's when I started to look at introducing certainty into my practice and turning towards digital design. So if I were to ask you, what do you think the applications of 3D printing within glassblowing are? Would you think of this? This is a clip showing the first optically clear 3D printer, which was pioneered by the MIT Media Lab. It's an absolutely phenomenal step in technology within glass design. And the results of this research are absolutely stunning. This has inspired me to think, how can 3D printing and digital design apply to my own glass practice? Seeing as something like this molten glass extruder is something I don't have in my studio, and I don't have anywhere near my studio, I simply won't have access to use a piece of equipment like this. But can some of the ideas and the philosophies behind it underpin my practice to make it more sustainable? I suppose I should start by explaining what exactly I mean by sustainable. It's a word that can get thrown around a lot, and it can be used often, perhaps, in a bid to sell work. However, for me, it covers a number of definitions. For my work to be sustainable, it has to be made using a manufacturing process that has a low ecological impact. The object itself has to be able to be altered easily to suit the maker and the client, or the manufacturing environment. And it also has to be a chosen manufacturing and designing method that is sustainable over time and career. So depending on what studios I go to and where I end up in the world and how my tools change, I'll be able to adapt my practice to still be able to make, to sustain that making practice. During my time at Plymouth College of Art, I got to talk to a lot of people working within product design. I found it quite curious how they approach making an object as opposed to how we did in the craft studio. At the beginning of outlining a project that they'd be making, they would have to consider all parts of the life cycle of that object and look at the overall ecology of it. This was hugely inspiring for me for my master's degree work. Looking at the whole ecology of the glass objects I was making, I decided to intercept and change 3 areas: the production, the use, and the end of life or reuse stage of the object. So looking towards the production, how could we make that more sustainable? If you're looking at figures alone, the few minutes that the glass object is on the end of a blowing iron does not look good. We burn a lot of fuels to make what we make. So what I tried to do for this area was to create a narrative around it with my audience or with the end user using my social media channels on my website to build up that emotional durability between the user and the object before it was even made. I'll talk about this later on in this presentation. At this stage, I also really lent on the human expertise that I had within my studio, from people in the glass studio and also in the fabrication lab that had a huge area of expertise that could make the production stage more efficient, spending less time and burning less gas making these glass objects. Then I started to look at use, looking at the durability of the object and making it more tactile and bespoke, which meant that the end user would want to keep this object and heirloom it and look after it. I then came on to the end of use and reuse. What materials did I use to make reuse possible? I really focused on using digital design to create a reuse of my objects. We'll be covering this later on in the presentation. In the publication, The New Materialism, How a Relationship with the Material World Can Change for the Better, Andrew Sims and Ruth Potts talk about how we need to redefine what materialism means. The challenge, then, is to define a new materialism. At the heart of this new relationship, encoded in a different attitude towards making, owning, sharing and caring for things, lies both much greater potential human well-being and lifestyles that are far less damaging to our life-supporting biosphere. The Green Movement, which works to save conditions for life on the planet, has perversely made synonymous with a rejection of the material world. So I believe that the solution is in the problem, and that indeed the antidote to materialism is in materiality, in exploring the relationship between the material and the producer and the consumer. A few years ago, I was approached by a friend of mine to produce 4 whiskey tumblers as a wedding present for his sister. For this, I asked would he be okay with me producing these initially on a computer-aided design program. So I did up some drawings of these designs and rendered them and sent it off to him. He was then able to pick and choose which design he felt most appealed to him. Even this little stage, as unimportant as it might seem, means that I'm managing the user's expectations right from the very beginning, and he's involved with the design process and therefore building up an emotional attachment to the design, and the design is building up an emotional durability at the same time. So by him hand picking almost which design he wants to get made in glass, he already has an investment with it. And it means that there's going to be a much higher chance that he'd be happy with the end result after it's been brought through the gas guzzling stage of glassblowing. Not only does this prototyping system manage expectations, these actual 3D prints can be used then to make molds that I then blow into in the hot shop. And these 3D prints are quite lightweight and sturdy. They can come with me wherever I go in the world. They can be just thrown into a bag. They're not heavy and cumbersome like metal or graphite molds. So wherever I go and whatever studio I end up in, I can make plaster molds from these. And the recipe that I use for these molds is something that I picked up in my time working in Estonia. These molds are made of a mixture of plaster, sawdust and toilet paper pulp and can last up to 40 units, which is quite good for small batch production out of plaster molds. I'm now going to show you a video that shows the making of these whiskey tumblers. As I mentioned before, computer-aided design processes enable us to create very realistic images of what the end user can expect before it even goes through the energy guzzling stage in the hot shop. But I was keen to understand the relationship between glassmaking and 3D printing and digital processes beyond the ability to create prototypes and mold positives. So back in the beginning, in the first year of my master's studies, I put together this video that tried to understand what that relationship was through a conversation. Because you see, 3D printing and glassmaking in themselves as manufacturing methods aren't so far removed. They're both additive manufacturing processes. And just as a filament feeds the nozzle on a 3D printing machine, glass rods feed at the end of a flame a lampworked piece, whether it's a bead or a pendant or something bigger. So this was a conversation that I needed to have between the two processes in order to move forward with my design thinking. The result of this inquisitive video was a series of balls and balls, made both in glass using the networking or knitting technique in lampworking and in 3D printing. However, an area that I didn't really expect to crop up within this was the tactility of the two objects that on paper seemed seemingly the same but just in a different material, but in reality were two completely different objects. The weight and the feel and the sound of the glass was so grounding, and this was felt by a lot of people that actually handled them and used them. There was a sense of tactility that the plastic 3D printed ball and the ball just didn't have. So that really allowed me to start to think and have confidence that there still is a position for handmade glass, that is something that can't be offered by 3D printed objects or by purely digitally designed objects. There still is a place for that lumpy, bumpy and unusually shaped handmade glass object. And it's this focus on tactility that I felt, if I could explore, would engage the user to be a bit closer with glass as a material and start to build up that relationship with the glass object that would make them want to wear it and love it and look after it for a lifetime or even several lifetimes. In my latest body of work, I've looked to combine individually handmade glass components with digitally manufactured materials such as laser cut leather, waterjet cut rubber and 3D printed PLA in order to give movement to the glass. And it's this controlled movement that ultimately makes the objects more durable and also are able to foster a closer user material experience. The glass pops in and out of these digitally manufactured frameworks without need for glue. This interchangeable modular design makes repair and redesign very possible. And it's that sense of movement as well, which I also designed into this neck piece. What you can see here is two individually white glass blown pieces that have been cold work and fitted into a 3D printed ball and socket joint. And what the ball and socket joint does is it allows an articulated movement to allow the glass pieces to come apart, to fit over the neck and fit comfortably around the wearer no matter what their contours are. However, the angle of rotation in the joint itself is designed so that the glass cannot hit off each other and break. The benefit here also of making a bespoke fixing for this neck piece was that I was able to design a 3D printed joint to fit the glass components specifically. So each side of this fixing actually has a different interior diameter that fits the specific glass piece. This is something that can be altered and reprinted if more versions of this neck piece were made. And the thing is, glass breaks. We all know it does. We've all been there. But how do we design the reuse and the end of life of the glass object to become more sustainable? It's really important for me that the user is able to take out the glass components and send them to me to be able to repair the piece. So in doing so, I hope the user themselves gets a certain sense of authority over repairing the piece. Potts and Sims in their book talks about how to extend the life of the object. The owner would know how to polish, adjust, oil and repair it. And that's the same attitude I want my users to take to the work that I produce for them. The adaptability that digital design allows really opens up a lot of options for our work. Amelia Klein talks about how, as individual makers as opposed to large-scale industry, we have a unique ability to adapt to situations and create new work under different prerequisites. It's much easier for us to change our making methods and our making setups to suit new designs, and do it in a much quicker way than, say, a large factory who produces a few different styles of glasses do, for example. But it's this adaptability as well that can even be looked at when we turn towards digital design manufacturing studios and how they can benefit our individually made hand glass objects. Smaller decentralized units in large-scale numbers can react with greater success to complex problems than large singular centralized ones. This is why, as neo-artisanal manufacturers, we really have a huge power to help to. This is why, as neo-artisans, we are in a. This is why, as neo-artisans, we are in an ideal position to try and tackle the symptoms of materialism that has caused the current environmental crisis. For example, rather than producing glass work and going to the hardware store to find fixings and fittings that it might work with and then having to grind and push and shove the glass to fit it, we can now make glass objects in our workshops, go to the digital design manufacturing labs and create fixtures and fittings to fit them so they're bespoke. And this can be very quick. Take, for example, the laser cut acetate fixings that I used that became part of a lighting design. This lighting design didn't use any glue anywhere in the process, so I was able to take all of these individually blown glass elements and these digitally designed fixtures and fixings to fit it all together and take it apart. So it meant going to different shows or even to different end users. The design could be made bespoke. This modular interchangeable design is an absolute key to my sustainable design practice. Production and consumption happens. To reject a lifestyle that has produced and consumed goods is not a solution to the current environmental crisis we are finding ourselves in. Instead, as Sims and Potts discuss in their writing, The New Materialism, How Our Relationship with the Material World Can Change for the Better, rather than focusing on the green agenda demonization of material goods, the solution, or at least working towards a solution, will instead come from an examination of the sociological and anthropological relationship with material goods. As a designer, it is imperative to examine all aspects of this relationship, including my own relationship to the material and making process. Within an artisanal craft practice like glassmaking, there has been a tendency to view the artisan as opposing industry and consumer culture. This belief that craft is opposing industry is something Glenn Adamson discusses in his book, The Invention of Craft, and how it is a hindrance to continue to perpetuate this standpoint. However, there is a space in which craft can still be grounded in a rich historical tradition without opposing innovation. Adamson states, craft's claim to cultural memory can be retained without fixing it as backward-looking or conservative. Rather than seeing handmade craft and industry as opposing modes of manufacture, I have used the industrialized glass process as inspiration for developing my small batch making methods in my artisan glass. David Pye has, prior to Adamson's writings, elaborated on the idea that there is a blurred area between the relationship between the certainty that comes from automated production and the risk involved in handmade. It is in this relationship that I seek to explore not only to change my manufacturing methods, but also to encourage the audience acceptance of the use of mass manufacturing methods in small batch production. By embracing this crossover, by both audience and maker, Can craft and design move forward and thrive within neo-artisanal manufacturing? The work I have produced over the course of my master's research has taken some inspiration from modes of mass production of material goods, namely glass goods, in order to create more efficient making systems at small scale artisanal level. This has included a close working relationship with our on-site fab lab and communications with overseas material and fab labs, working specifically within eco-design. And I do think it's within changing this perception that the audience has of glass is how we're going to move forward and create a more sustainable glass practice. I often say Granny's dresser is the greatest waste. Glasses gathering dust, never used because they're the good glasses. It is my intention to subvert the commonly conceived restraints of glass as a material. The idea that glass is too fragile to use, I feel, is incredibly wasteful. For me, I believe to use is to be sustainable, not to let glass products become shrouded in preciousness where they get to a level where their intentions are lost. This is why I make work that's wearable, that's usable, that's functional, that can bring the human experience of the material to be closer. To stay up to date with the projects that I'm working on, you can visit my website www.lauraquinndesign.com. You can also reach out to me and see what I've been doing through my social networking sites on Facebook and Instagram under the handle Laura Quinn Design. I'd like to take this opportunity now to say a big thank you to the Glass Art Society for allowing me this chance to present to you today. And although it's not in person in Sweden as we all hoped it would be, it's still something, and it's still a way for us to reach out to each other and share our glass experience. So let's keep the communication going through lockdown and afterwards, and hopefully we'll see you all again at next year's conference. As always, stay safe and stay glassy.